All right, good morning. Good morning, everyone. I'm excited to see you guys here to join us for another morning of devotionals together. See Haley Katra and Hannah Wigdall have joined on Instagram. Hey, Hannah Hibbs, good to see you. You're one of our most faithful watchers, tuners, listeners, so it's good to see you. Good to see you, Mary. Um, yeah, I see ISU has joined in. It's good to see you. Um, I just wanted to start off this morning. Hey, Stephanie. And I just wanted to start off this morning and ask you what is something that you tried to teach someone? And maybe it was an utter failure or just something you're passionate about teaching. What is something that you are passionate about teaching others? Um, I think growing up, I am used to teaching in a lot of different kind of contexts. One thing that I taught a lot growing up was swim lessons. And I was not the best swimmer in the world, but I quickly learned that I needed to be at least kind of somewhat proficient. So I like all throughout middle school and no, not middle school, high school, I taught a lot of swim lessons. So just what's something that you've taught someone or you've tried to teach someone? Maybe it was how to make grilled cheese. You know, I don't know. But something that you are passionate about teaching other people, or you just really enjoy teaching other people about. Beatty says tennis skills. Yeah, tennis skills. Those are sweet. I know Beatty's a good tennis player, and she's taught a lot of DMAC people. Using your blinker when you want to change lanes. Yes, Stephanie, that's a great thing to teach people and can help prevent a lot of road rage. Jordan said how to shoot a rifle well. You know, I figured out late in life that I am left-eye dominant, but I'm right-eyed. So like trying to shoot a rifle for me is, you just got to look over. It's so weird. Molly Hamilton dance classes. That's sweet. Alexis teaching roommates how to play the ukulele. Now that's really cool. I remember trying to learn how to do the guitar for the first time. I kind of taught myself via the internet. Eileen, curling. Eileen, I really want to know, like, if you actually do a lot of curling. I don't think I ever knew that about you. Hannah Wigdall, how to pick sweet corn. I am sure that there is a good method to how to pick really good sweet corn, Hannah. Hannah Hibbs says, love teaching percussion in high school, but it's very hard to teach someone how to keep a beat when they have no rhythm. Yeah, I would probably not be the person for you to teach, Hannah. I think I have rhythm, and then I realize I don't have rhythm. My wife would make sure that you know that if I ever try to dance. No, she's awesome. Haley Katra says she attempted to teach marching band step technique to her underclassmen. That's very interesting. So Eileen, not anymore. There's no real curling in Iowa. Yeah, I can tell. There's lots of curling in Minnesota. There's like sweet places to go curling, I think, up there. So I'm asking you, what is something that you enjoy teaching people, or maybe even you have a passion to teach people about? And Kylie said how to curl people's hair. That's something that I think there's been a lot of Zoom calls over the last month where you just see how passionate she is about how to curl your hair, and she's, you see other girls coming in with these weird kind of funky hair things on, and you're like, what? Oh, you heard from Kylie how to curl hair. But the reason I bring that up is because in this passage, Jesus, he is really going to describe to us what is a gospel community. What is a Jesus following community? And as we kind of dig into this next part of the Sermon on the Mount, it's going to build on the previous part. But Jesus, he's going to kind of nail the hammer, put the hammer right on the head of the nail and describe what it is he expects of a Jesus following community. So let's just spend some time, pray, and ask God to speak to our hearts this morning and prepare us for the day. And if you're listening in the future, this might be awkward, but why don't you spend a minute and just pray with me here. Father, I thank you that you have loved us, that you have sent Jesus to us, that he paid a penalty for our sins on the cross. And I thank you that he lays out for his people what he expects of them and what kind of culture he wants among his followers. So I pray that you'd help us even this morning to put this into practice in our own lives, in how we relate with one another, even in this time that we're in. So just pray for this in your name. Amen. All right, so I'm just going to read the passage, and we're in Matthew 5, verses 13 through 20, and I just want to share a few thoughts with you just for the day. So Matthew 5, 13 through 20, it says, "You are the salt of the earth. But if the salt should lose its taste, how can it be made salty again? It's no longer good for anything but to be thrown out and trampled under people's feet. You are the light of the world. A city situated on a hill cannot be hidden. No one lights a lamp and puts it under a basket, but rather on a lampstand, and it gives light for all who are in the house. In the same way, let your light shine before others, so that they may see your good works and give glory to your Father in heaven. Don't think that I came to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish them, but to fulfill. For truly I tell you, until heaven and earth pass away, not the smallest letter or one stroke of a letter will pass away from the law until all things are accomplished. Therefore, whoever breaks one of the least of these commands and teaches others to do the same will be called least in the kingdom of heaven. But whoever does and teaches these commands will be called great in the kingdom of heaven. For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven." And here, Jesus is kind of rounding out the introduction to his Sermon on the Mount, and is introducing his main thesis. What's his main thesis? His main thesis is that unless if your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and the Pharisees, you will not enter the kingdom of heaven. But what has he done up until this point? This is just so crucial for us to understand. What has he done up until this point in his introduction? Well, what he's done is he's described what a Jesus-following culture and community should look like. If you remember yesterday or this previous section, Jesus said, "Blessed are the poor in spirit. Blessed are those who mourn." And he's given this list of virtues which are completely counter to the culture that he was living in, and even to today in a lot of degrees. And if you were just to read those, John Hastings is talking about how you should just bank your life. You should bet your life on the fact that Jesus is who he says he is. And if you were to live your life this way, and if you were to hear what Jesus is saying there, you might be tempted to think something that's wrong. You might be tempted to think that what Jesus is promoting is that we should all go into isolation. Blessed are the poor in spirit. If we need to do that, then we need to move away from everyone around us. And you might be tempted to become very, separate from the culture, but very what we would call passive in how you engage with the culture around you. And Timothy Keller, he wrote a book called Center Church. It's in our leadership training materials, and it describes, and I'm just going to kind of introduce it to you here. We have some cultures that are very much the same. I know I have really bad handwriting, but when Christian culture is the same as the culture around it, that's bad. But it can be good when we identify with the people around us. Or some Christian cultures can be very different, and so different that they just can't identify with who we are. There can also be passive cultures in Christianity that don't really engage or maybe even share the gospel. or there can be really active and really antagonistic cultures within Christianity. And what you're maybe tempted to think at the beginning of this is what Jesus is addressing is this idea of just personal holiness. The culture within Christian community needs to be different. And, in some ways he's addressing the heart of what it is we're doing in those first few blesseds. But then what he does, if you're tempted to think you should go live on a mountain and just be devoid of all people, he says you should be the salt and light. So he moves from a passive to an active approach. That the way you engage your culture, you should actually become salt and light. And salt, it has a preserving influence on people and society and morally. And we should just know that foolish disciples are not salty disciples. When it talks about, if the salt becomes not salty again, it's like you should be getting this image of like a foolish person who's just not living their life in a way that makes sense with the gospel. And so if it loses saltiness, it's just not effective anymore. And so we should just remember that foolish Christians have no influence. But then also he uses the analogy of light. And light is what brings life to people. And light, it illuminates things around them. And so what we should also know is that hidden Christians or secret disciples have no influence as well. And so if we want to have a Jesus discipleship culture around us, yes, we need to work on our personal holiness. The culture within us needs to be different, but we shouldn't be entirely passive. There should be something active in us that has an impact on the world around us. And then if you're tempted to think that we should just be completely different, Jesus, he flips the script here. What does it say in verse 17? It says, "Don't think that I came to abolish the law." So maybe up to this point you thought that, like, wow, Jesus, he's a revolutionary. He's gonna overturn the system. And what he does, he says, well, don't think I came to abolish the law or the prophets, the Old Testament covenant. He said, I didn't come to abolish it, but to fulfill. And what he's doing is he's identifying with the culture around him, this sameness aspect, the good things in the culture around him, the God-fearing nature of the culture around him. He's identifying with the good commands that they're probably following. But he's saying, I didn't come to abolish that. It's good, but it was good for a time because it was meant to point to something else into the future. And that's what it says, that's me. So that I came to fulfill all that. I'm the one the entire Old Testament is looking forward to. And so he's moving now into addressing this way that he identifies with the culture around him. And that's just so unique. He's actually giving a model for what Jesus following community looks like. And then, if what he says in the end here, he says, therefore, do the same, and teach people to do this as well. So if you don't do what it says, and if you teach others to not follow the least commandment, you'll be least in the kingdom. But if you do what it says, and if you teach others to do what it says, then you'll be great in the kingdom. And so he moves now into this other, community within a community is what we call it, where there's some sameness going on, but also we're needing to address within ourselves this aspect of teaching one another, that in a gospel community there should be this teaching one another to obey the word of God. And so Jesus, what he does in this passage is he completes this full circle. If you read through John 17, you'll see this same picture of a Jesus-following Christian community, that you can fall outside of these bounds and become just a friend group or a holy huddle or worldly or aggressive and uncaring. Or if you're within the bounds of what would probably be a healthy Christian community, you just be like a community within the community. You'd be a faithful ambassador or a bold proclaimer of the truth, or just even countercultural. And the picture that Jesus gives us here is of this community that he's describing, of what it looks like to follow Jesus with the people around you. And then he turns to verse 20, and you might be wondering, like, okay, well, if that's what a Jesus community looks like, where you're salt, you're light, you have these different values, there's this teaching of one another, we're having an impact on the world around us. How do you get into that community? How do you get into that community? And he gives us the answer in verse 20. He says, "For I tell you, unless your righteousness surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven." And so he just gave this beautiful picture of what Jesus culture, Jesus following culture should look like. And you're thinking, like, yes, that is what I want. And then he tells you this, and you're like, wait, what? The scribes and the Pharisees, they were like the top dogs in the religious culture around them. They were obedient to the law to a T, the way that they would perceive. And so the idea that your righteousness had to surpass that of the scribes and Pharisees would probably just leave you stumped. Like, what? Who can do that? I can't do that. What in the world is going on here? And if you want to know what it looks like to have a righteousness that surpasses that of the scribes and Pharisees, and how the scribes and Pharisees, the religious zealots of the day, got it wrong, well, you need to listen to the next few weeks here. Because the next, however many teachings, Jesus is going to dive into example after example after example of how the law was meant to bring about something greater than what the scribes and the Pharisees were just living by. He's going to talk about money. He's going to talk about prayer. He's going to talk about pride. He's going to talk about just so many different things. And I don't want to leave you on too much of a cliffhanger. But I'll kind of cut to the chase a little bit. But how is it that our righteousness can surpass that of the scribes and that of the Pharisees? The only way that can happen is if you have a righteousness that's outside of yourself, that becomes yours, that changes and turns you into the kind of person that follows Jesus the way he describes, in these first 20 verses. And that's the righteousness that comes through Jesus, through his death on the cross and what he provides for us. But this next week, as we're digging into this Sermon on the Mount, what I want us to do is I want to sit in every single one of these examples of how Jesus expounds upon the law and what it really means to keep it, and allow it to break us. Allow it to break us of self-righteousness, allow it to break us of self-reliance, and to be thankful for the righteousness that comes from Jesus. So that's really all I have for you today, and I hope it's a blessing and encouragement to you today. And I want you to think about, like, how can I live this out even in the midst of this COVID-19, to live this kind of Jesus culture where we're a community within a community, we're faithful ambassadors, bold proclaimers, and a culture that's just different than the world around us. So thank you guys so much. We love you. We're praying for you, and we can't wait to see you guys again.